Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Chekow-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. Welcome to Books Sandwiched In. Thank you. Just a bit of housekeeping. Please silence your cell phones at this time. Our thanks go to those who help fund programs like these through FFRPL, the dedicated FFRPL committee members who curate and organize these events, our guest speakers who so graciously share their time and talents with us, the library staff who help with our setup and production, and of course the thousands of people who attend each year. We are live streaming the formal portion of today's program to the library's YouTube channel at Rochester Public Library, New York. If you need to access the induction loop service in this auditorium, please adjust your hearing aid to the T switch. A bit of background. Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library, or FFRPL, expands the library's community impact through fundraising, marketing, and programming. We also manage restricted funds that provide supplemental materials support to 62 eligible libraries in Monroe, Ontario, Wayne, Livingston, Orleans, and Genesee counties. One way that we raise funds is from book sales on-site and online. You can shop the current bag sale, $1 a bag for books, or browse our online inventory of 7,500 quality used books at AbeBooks, Alibris, and Biblio. You search for RPL Library Store at those sites. FFRPL presents programs like today's Book Sandwiched In review and our annual Sokol High School Literary Awards. We invite you to attend the Sokol Awards ceremony on Thursday, April 24th at 4 p.m. in this auditorium. FFRPL supports the library's special community programs and projects, such as RPL's new Aviation Station program, a 2-month intensive course designed for youth ages 13 to 17 years old, offered through the Sully Branch Library. We also support library exhibits, and we're the founding sponsor of Central's signature Art of the Book and Paper exhibit. The registration deadline for the 2025 show is May 16th. Visit ffrpl.org for details and the link to the entry form. FFRPL helps to create specialized spaces, such as the new mobile library, RPL Go, which is now operating as part of the Lyle Branch's hybrid services. RPL Go supports the library's mission to engage the community in lifelong learning through equal access to information, technology, and expert staff. And finally, FFRPL purchases supplemental materials for the library. For the last 6 years, we have purchased New York State Empire Passes for every MCLS library, central, branches, and towns. Empire Passes provide free access at New York State Parks and the State Department of Environmental Conservation, including forests, beaches, and trails. And the passes are available for checkout with your library card. Today, Jose DaCosta will review Hip Hop is History by Questlove. Questlove is a 6-time Grammy Award-winning musician, Academy Award-winning filmmaker, a drummer, DJ, producer, director, and New York Times bestselling author. In this landmark book, he offers a perceptive, personal reflection on the first 50 years of the, quote, miraculous, mercurial genre of hip-hop. He traces the creative and cultural forces that made and shaped hip-hop, highlights chart-topping hits, and includes insider stories from top names in the industry. Our presenter, Jose, is a retired corporate executive with a deep appreciation for history, culture, and the arts. As the founder of Exodus to Jazz Productions, he produced 75 jazz concerts in Greater Rochester, featuring world-renowned musicians. Please welcome Mr. DaCosta to our podium.
Okay, close your eyes, please. Close your eyes. Now Now let this music take you back to where I know y'all were years ago. Yeah. Now I'm going to kind of end it there and bring you back. Okay. Thank you, Susan, for your introduction. And I want to really thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some realities about my past that I hope don't take away from the presentation. And that leads to my disclaimer statement. I was born in the South Bronx, not far from Fort Apache. People know about Fort Apache in the South Bronx, however, I have no insight into what that lifestyle was for people who were immersed in what people know and envision about Fort Apache. My parents were very dedicated to isolating us from the real trauma of growing up in that kind of very dysfunctional neighborhood of people who are functioning to try and better their lives. But what I'm going to share with you is another fact, and that is, first let me ask a question. How many of you are hip-hop fans? Okay. All right. How many of you have read the book, Hip Hop is History? Okay, 3 of you. Okay, all right. Another disclaimer. I had to take several attempts to get really into the book because I found it to be a very dense recollection, very comprehensive personal and genre history that was almost encyclopedic. It has a lot of facts in it, and I had to start and stop several times. So I saw 3 hands, and I just want you to know that you will be my default resources when I get a question I cannot answer, all right? But to really kind of get into the book fully, I had to spend a little time really understanding Questlove's legacy and his story, because the book is dense with facts. And for me, when I see and read a book that is that dense, I got to really go back and say, who is this author? And is he or she credible? And so I'm going to spend a little time just highlighting Questlove's street cred. All right. And then what I did was I presumed that you probably have a lot of questions that I know I had as I started reading the book. And so I just presumed some questions that I hope will be of interest to you. And then I had some questions that I had about the hip-hop movement in general. And so I just presumed that they might also be of interest to you. But just so that I don't miss anything, what are some questions that you came in here with right now about hip-hop? Either the book, Hip-Hop as History, or hip-hop as a genre. What questions do you have? Okay. And the question was, are rap and hip-hop used synonymously? Okay. Okay. Another question? Well, I may have to, again, default to my 3 supporters here. I understand. But I still have to. I still am challenged by just my TV remote. So, we're not too far apart. Okay. Any other questions, Jim?
What was the line that was so direct for someone like Quincy Jones, relatively late in his life, of course, passed recently,
Yeah.
to make the connection to hip hop when it didn't seem to some of us the type of music he developed for those other 60 years of his career?
Everybody hear the question? Okay, what was the line, what was the draw for Quincy Jones to hip hop when it was a real transition from the kind of music that he had been done for a large part of his career? Okay, all right. And there's one more? Yes, ma'am.
My young landlord is very into hip hop. Does it have to be played as loud? His dog runs up and stays with me when he gets home.
Loud. Okay. All right. Okay. There are some questions here, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them. And I have to. You have another question? Yeah.
In truth, I haven't read the book. I listened to Questlove talking about the book.
Okay.
I'm a Questlove fan. What is the pushback on this genre of music? That's what I'd like to know about because, there are people who don't care for classical music, but it's not, it doesn't have that stigma when people say they don't care for it. I guess country, there is a stigma when people don't like country, I guess there's a pushback on country, but I'm just wondering where that comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was one of the things that I was curious about as well because I developed I fell as a victim to some of the narratives around hip hop to the point where I wouldn't even listen to it. But that was because I really wasn't listening to it. Okay, so we'll come to that. Okay, so we got some questions, some that I presumed and some here, and I'll be looking for my help from my default people. And then the final thoughts will touch on Questlove's storytelling style and his depth and his thoroughness. I mean, it's just amazing. And yet, what I considered to be a real problem was the absence of a deep expression of the role of women in the book. And so I'll come to that. But the fact is, hip-hop as history is a real deep dive. It's a serious dive into the genre and its developments. And in my final thoughts, I'll just encourage you to go back and listen to the classics, the hip-hop classics. Now, Questlove's credibility as a hip-hop author, thank you, Susan. You've covered this beautifully for me, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, okay? But it was a question I had in my own mind as I'm reading it, because as I'm reading it, I'm reading the detail of his description of engagements. I said, how could this person be so knowledgeable of what went on and the depth of the conversations between hip-hop artists as they collaborated and as they worked out situations? And the fact is, he was there. He was there in those formative stages of hip-hop. As a drummer, a teen drummer, and as a DJ, he experienced this genre's development and growth firsthand. And some of his pioneer peers, Public Enemy, A Tribe Called Quest, that's his namesake, Tribe Called Quest, and a group that may address some of your questions, NWA. Anybody know what NWA stands for? Can't hear you.
It's a Northwest Airlines.
Okay. West Coast acronym for Niggas with Attitudes. Okay? And the group was comprised of, I'm sure you've heard these names, Eazy-Z, Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, R.C. Wren and DJ Yellen. Other credibility that I assigned to Questlove, the hip hop band The Roots. You watch Jimmy Fallon, the Tonight Show. I mean, Roots is a stellar and has been a long-standing, highly credible hip hop band, and he brings it to the music to the TV audience every night. He brings it, so that to me really underlines his credibility. He is a collaborator, bar none. I mean, people come to him based on both his knowledge of how music evolved, how the genre developed, but he just has a tremendous and deep understanding of hip hop that a lot of artists and producers rely on when they do their specials and their documentaries. And then, like I said, TV is really blessed to have him as the band leader of the Tonight Show. Anybody see the award-winning film Summer of Soul? Did you realize that Questlove actually was the? Okay, all right. Well, you got that. I mean, and that to me reinforces his credibility. But at the same time, in 2023, Questlove was asked to do a 13-minute tribute at the Grammys in recognition of hip-hop and its journey. And you don't ask just anybody to do that. And so he took on that assignment, and he took it on with some trepidation, but that just reinforced his credibility as a pioneer in hip-hop. Now, what are some of the questions I had about the book? Again, I admittedly struggled getting into it. First question is, what is the central theme of hip-hop is history, the book? And what it really does, and you said it nicely, Susan, it explores hip-hop's evolution from 1993 to 97, and really examines in depth the cultural, social, and political events that shaped the genre. Now, what that says is that the genre came out of all the stimuli and all the social issues that were really bubbling in the marginalized communities that were expressed in music, and hip-hop was one form of expression. We know jazz did the same thing, and R&B did the same thing. Well, hip-hop represented a culmination of people's reaction to the lives that they were living in and the circumstances under which they were trying to strive. So that's what the central theme is, how that evolution was inspired. How does hip-hop is history get explained by Questlove? Because that title kind of confused me a little bit. If you were walking down the street and you were with a friend and your friend said, hey, this guy looks pretty clean, he's dressed very nicely, and you have a different opinion, you said, man, this cat is history. He dresses, he history, he history. What would that mean to you? He's not relevant. He's not relevant. And so I was trying to figure out, what did hip-hop is history mean when Questlove titled it as for the book? And in the book, he actually presents his two aspects. One, he talks about the hip-hop that he grew up in and that he developed in, and the roots that hip-hop had in his formative years as a teen in Philadelphia. He really appreciated the community aspect, the connection with the community, and how hip-hop was the voice for a lot of people who we would say today are voiceless, expressing their frustrations. I mean, you think about the Black Lives Matter movement and the whole issue that gets centered on police and segments of the black community, and how black men and women, get, so like open season on black men and black women. Well, that message was coming through in early stages of hip hop. And those messages came through in different environments, some of which were not too far from where I grew up in the Bronx, Sedgwick Avenue, where they say hip hop originated in 1973. When I was born in the South Bronx, I wasn't too far from Sedgwick Avenue. I didn't know that environment, okay, and I was obviously born years before 73, although it's not that obvious, I hope. But again, I said my parents isolated us from a lot of that. But hip hop was the core of a lot of the parties and social gatherings that populated the communities in those days. And what he does in the book is critique what he sees as a movement from those community-based values of speaking for the people and the authentic expression of not just black, but brown and white reactions to the circumstances that they are trying to elevate above. There was an authenticity that hip-hop is history laments, because he talks about the lack of a social consciousness in much of what is the popular hip-hop today. And so that is one of the issues, that's one of the interpretations of the title. The other one, though, is that he talks to hip-hop as a still living, still breathing, still developing expression of today's culture. And when he says hip-hop is history, in that sense of it still being living, he's talking about how hip-hop samples the past, artists of the past, and brings it into the current headset of people and into the current can of people, so that they don't forget the past, but those contributions of the past are part of the present. Yes. Right. Exactly. And that reaching back is part of Questlove's interpretation, the other aspect of the title, Hip Hop is History, because it reaches back and it makes past history current. And then the other aspect of it that I appreciated, and I said it before, is the detailed level of his storytelling in the book. I mean, and it's filled with just some very iconic memories. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Iconic memories. So that as a history document, it's a very personal memoir. And I can't think of, based on some of the research I was doing while I was trying to read the book, I can't think of anybody who was more committed and more passionate about keeping the history of hip-hop alive and putting it in its proper perspective so people understand it and people break out of the negative narratives that are holding a lot of people. Remember in the 80s when the group called Public Enemy, okay, out of Compton, and what's the name? Tipper Gore, right. Okay, thank you. Tipper Gore started attacking much of what was representative of hip-hop music because it challenged what was happening. It was as Chuck D says, it was the CNN of certain aspects of the black community. But it talked about pushing back against the oppressive police, the corrupt politicians, and giving people voice. And so when you ask the question, where did this this issue with hip-hop and its interpretation it came from people interpreting from the music and assuming what the lyrics were saying, when in fact most of the early lyrics were very progressive and very socially conscious and authentic representations of life in certain communities. Another question I had is, how does Questlove incorporate personal experiences in the narrative? And clearly, when you read it, and I encourage you to read it, he shares firsthand accounts of meeting hip-hop legends during the golden age of hip-hop, and he witnessed its shift during the time of increasing commercialization and increasing striving of many of the artists to get recognized and to make some money. Okay, but he talks to the personal experiences and does so in a way that, again, as I got into the book, it's like, for me, it was like reading an encyclopedia because it's that rich and that full. So don't think you're going to pick it up and just blow through the chapters and at the end of a chapter say, okay, I understand that. No, at the end of the chapter, you're going to go back and say, wow, what did he say? At least that's what I did. Let me give you an example. What is an example of an iconic memory shared by Questlove? One of the things that I gained an appreciation for in the book was one of the huge myths that exists around hip-hop history, and that is the relationship between Biggie and Tupac. Questlove recalls being present at a very rare and early freestyle session between Notorious Big, Biggie, and Tupac. And he describes their interaction. They're going at it one bar by bar and feeding off each other. And he said he was witnessing a brotherly bond developing between these two artists. They were a pair of artists who actually really appreciated each other and supported each other and encouraged each other in the early stages. But I'm going to come back to that. Aisha.
What I heard is that they never actually had a beef with each other.
Okay, let me write that down. Beef.
Tupac's death was laying on Biggie, and then Biggie's death was supposedly a retaliation, but what I understand is they never actually had a beef with each other.
Okay, and I'm going to share with you Questlove's perspective on that very point. I appreciate that. Okay. All right. So now, I had some questions about hip-hop's development. I first talked about the book and Questlove's approach to it. Hip-hop's development. Why does Questlove focus on the period 1993 to 97? 1973, thank you. 73 to 97? Because that's when he was developing, and that's when hip-hop was developing its formative style and its overall impact. Questlove argues that these years represent hip-hop's formative decades, from its birth in the Bronx, Sedgwick Avenue, to its dominance as a mainstream music. 1997 represents what he considers to be one of the greatest tragedies of the hip-hop genre, with the deaths of Tupac and Biggie, and the beginning of a pretty dramatic transition to an era of globalization, commercialization of the hip-hop genre, and a lot of people tell you the loss of the authentic aspects of hip-hop. Again, this probably gets at another earlier question. How does Questlove connect hip-hop to broader historical movements? He frames hip-hop as a response to systemic inequalities, drawing parallels to the civil rights movement, Black Power, economic shifts in urban America, and the fact that artists, hip-hop artists, historically functioned as the griots, the storytellers, as well as the activists. I was going to play a short clip, but I'm going to skip that and recommend you listen to it when you get home. But again, I made the comment that Public Enemy's Chucky D referred to hip-hop as the Black CNN. What are some of the most significant milestones in hip-hop's history, according to Questlove? The birth of the DJ culture with Kool Herc's block parties in '73 in Sedgwick, the South Bronx. Herc was short for Hercules, and I understand in the book that at these parties he would often, rip off his shirt and just show the muscularity associated with being a DJ, and that kind of began to usher in this masculinity into the genre. But again, back then it was focused on the community's interests. The first hip-hop tune to hit the #1 position on Billboard, Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight, 1979. And then the lyrical storytelling of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Fives, The Message, okay? That's why I say we need to go back and rehear the lyrics and what they were saying. And to some people who are wedded in the establishment status quo, it sounds threatening. To other people, it was an expression of their aspirations. Golden era of innovation, 1980s to early 1990s, Public Enemy, Run DMC, A Tribe Called Quest. What I appreciated, for example, in the book is how Questlove really tries to make a distinction that separates these hip-hop bands and the association a lot of people have with them as instigating conflict and instigating gang confrontations. And in the book, he talks, for example, Run DMC would often begin their concerts knowing that different hip-hop inspired gangs were there. And he would call the gang leaders together and say, look, this is my turf, this is my concert, and we're not going to have any of that nonsense of you guys fighting and shooting up and destroying what we're trying to do from a positive standpoint. And he got to the point where, and not just him, but the group Run DMC got to the point where these gang leaders, who often came for no positive reason, would defer and delay the confrontations till after the concerts. But after the concert also affected how the concert was reported upon in the news, and that led to this coloring of hip-hop as a genre that inspired, when in fact many of these hip-hop leaders were trying to get people together. And that, in fact, was one of the things that, I'll get to it later, excuse me. And then he talks about the emergence of the West Coast gangster rap, NWA, and its clash with the East Coast styles. There was a mainstream explosion as the talents of Tupac, Biggie, Z, and the labels Death Row and Bad Boy really started to popularize hip-hop. I mean, it really started to take off. But as a result of a serious misunderstanding surrounding an event that affected Tupac, that misunderstanding led to a clash that hip-hop still reels in today, although on a much less intense level, and I'll get into that. Again, this is just showing some of the milestones, the birth of DJ culture, first rap song, Sugar Hill Gang. In 96, 97, the emergence of that gangster rap. And that was what a lot of people were reacting to and turning away from the gangster rap. And also in my mind, denigration of females and how they treated the women and the lack of women's voice in these messages colored people's perceptions. Briefly, Questlove, what does he say about commercialization? He believes and he criticizes its impact on the real positive revolutionary spirit that was reflected in early hip-hop. And the shift from local communities and representing the voice of local communities to consumer-driven entertainment. He talks about the role of technology, where DJs became almost as important, if not more important, than the artists themselves in terms of their sampling and their ability to pull tracks together and generate responses from the audience. And the DJs played a very significant role in the popularity and the increase of hip-hop's reach. He speaks briefly about the regional differences. I'm not going to get into a lot of it, but basically he does recognize regional differences, and when you want to get into a bit deeper understanding, read the book. This is an area that initially I was questioning in my early reading, but then I kind of put it aside until my wife and I went to a Mary J. Blige concert in Toronto. And it reminded me, oh man, Mary J. Blige, that's a bad sister. And she played a major role in the hip-hop soul development. Marginally referred to, minimally referred to in the book. And it led me to a question, well, geez, where's Lauryn Hill? Okay, Lauryn Hill authored and was the composer of one of my favorite albums, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Pop, major blockbuster. Few details about them, although he does give them credit for being major contributors. He doesn't spend much time sharing the stories, the full story. He emphasizes both the artistry of women and their focus on personal stories. But he gives them short shrift in terms of the comprehensiveness that he develops the stories of the male artist. Final thoughts on female contributions. He acknowledges, Questlove acknowledges that women often were sidelined in hip-hop's narratives. But while he recognizes the issue, the book falls far short of rewriting that imbalance. And so I'm frankly inspired, and I'm going to do it. Just send him a little note, okay? Because I do appreciate the book, and I encourage everybody to read it. But I actually am going to send him a little note because I respect his contribution, what he's doing. But oh, by the way, we need part 2. What is Questlove's perspective on Biggie and Tupac? How are we doing on time, Susan? Okay. Okay. His personal connection with Biggie. Wow, this guy's surprisingly warm. He's a gifted storyteller who valued artistry in general. Questlove talks about different situations where he engaged with Biggie, and Biggie was like, man, he tried to understand different aspects of music in general and was very open to embracing that. Tupac, Questlove considered a lightning rod of emotion and activism. And that caused him to have a difficult time accepting Big E's explanation that followed an event that I'm going to just highlight real quickly. Questlove's insight into relationship, he said they began with mutual admiration and camaraderie. Biggie, in fact, had asked Tupac to be his manager. But Tupac, not wanting to shake the, rattle people's cages, said, nah, man, you stay with Sean Diddy Combs. You stay with him. The feud ignited, however, when Tupac was shot in 1994 at a recording studio called Quad Studios. Tupac was convinced that Biggie and Combs were complicit in that because of the competitiveness and some small disagreements that they may have had. Biggie, and it was fueled by the fact that Biggie had, shortly after Tupac was shot, released a tune entitled Who Shot Ya? And Tupac saw that as a taunt, when in fact Biggie tried desperately, according to Questlove, to convince Tupac that it was just circumstantial. It just happened that I got this tune out, and it just happened that you were shot several days or shortly before the tune came out. And again, that led to the deaths of both of them and what he considers hip-hop's greatest tragedy, one of the greatest tragedies. Today, Questlove believes that a lot of the conflicts that you hear, Drake and Lamar and Kendrick Lamar and Drake and others that I'm not really attuned to, he thinks those are really more performative conflicts and beefs, that they are not anywhere near as intense, and they do not run the risk that the Tupac and Biggie feud did, because there's too much commercial interest behind them. So the commercial interest will promote these beefs, but basically say, okay, don't take it too far, because too many managers, too many recording companies, too many venues are making too much money. Okay, and so there's a lot of effort, a lot of focus on collaboration across the different artists versus confrontation. But Questlove in the book also cautions against even some of that staged performative confrontation. He cautions against it possibly getting out of hand and leading to another series of deaths. Quincy Jones. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. It's a really good point, because in the book we talk about the gun violence in the early stages, and then actually the medication of choice for a period of time was 40 OZs. A lot of the hip hop artists were addicted to 40s, and then from 40s it became crack, as crack was introduced into the LA, into the black communities, and then, cocaine in general. So, yeah, there were medications that were imposed on these artists throughout the development of hip-hop. Yeah. Final thoughts? Oh, I was going to make the comment about Quincy Jones. I'm trying to remember the year, but Quincy Jones was actually brought in to help mediate this conflict between the different hip-hop centers. And Jim Brown, the football player, played a key part in that as well. And those connections led Quincy to explore the possibility of, well, let me see what I can do with this talent Okay, and that's what kind of inspired a lot of the transitions that Quincy went through incorporating hip-hop and that genre in his recordings. But he actually tried hard to, and was successful, Frank, in mediating a lot of that conflict. The point that Questlove makes is that hip-hop is more than music, it's a movement. And that at its authentic core, it is the voice of people, much like other musical expressions were. I recommend the book, but just approach it with the understanding that it's a dense read, and that you're probably going to find yourself branching off, as I did, into other research sources to get a fuller picture, which I did when I saw the lack of women. It caused me to branch off and get a better understanding of, well, wait, what role did these women play in this and in the development? So if you're interested in hip-hop, read the book. Hip-hop books by women authors, to me, are necessary to complete the story, though. And I just did a Google search on a number of books, and these are two books that I offer, but I'm just sure that there are many more that will be positive resources. And then I encourage you to watch the Netflix series, The Hip Hop Evolution, okay, to get a fuller picture. So, does hip hop have to be played loudly? No, it doesn't. It doesn't have to be played loudly. It's just a choice that he's making. And you may need to help him develop an understanding of how that choice is not helpful. Rap and hip hop, in the book, they kind of use interchangeably. Yeah. Questlove considers Lauryn Hill a rap artist, but he also refers to her as hip hop in its purest sense, because she walked away from the commercialization and the manipulation by the record companies and the media establishments. So with that, I'm at my wit's end. That's all I know, and it's only because I can read. But you have any questions, any key questions that you have that were not answered?